The North Atlantic, a world of infinite, churning grey. The sky is a leaden, bruised canopy, indistinguishable from the slate-grey waves that heave and sigh with a relentless, primordial rhythm. There is no land, no hope, only the vast, cold, and unforgiving emptiness. This is not a place for men. It is a hunting ground. And beneath the surface, in the crushing, silent darkness of the abyss, the apex predators are on the prowl. Inside the cramped, suffocating confines of U-571, the air is a foul cocktail of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of fear. The low, guttural thrum of the electric motors is the only sound, a steady, predatory heartbeat. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Richter, a veteran of a dozen patrols, presses his eye to the periscope, his face illuminated by the faint green glow of the instrument panel. He is 28 years old, but his eyes hold the ancient weariness of a man who has lived a lifetime in the shadows, dealing in death. This is his kingdom. The U-boat is not merely a vessel, it is an extension of his will, a sleek, grey wolf of steel and rivets. Here, in the deep, they are the masters. They are ghosts, invisible, untouchable. The surface world, with its lumbering freighters and frantic, searching escorts, is a two-dimensional game board. They, the U-boat men, are the masters of the third dimension, the vertical plane of the deep. They can rise to strike and vanish into the blackness with impunity. The cry comes from the hydrophone operator, his face a mask of concentration under his bulky headphones. Schiffsschrauben. I am Austin. Propeller noises. To the east. A convoy. The lifeblood of the Allied war effort, a slow, fat serpent of steel and precious cargo, slithering across the Atlantic, believing itself safe. Richter allows a thin, cold smile. The hunt has begun. This is the happy time for the U-boat waffer. Karl Dernitz's wolf packs, groups of submarines, coordinated by radio, are a scythe reaping a terrible harvest in the Atlantic. They are strangling Great Britain, sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies can build them. The crews, a mixture of fresh-faced boys and hardened veterans, are the elite of the Kriegsmarine, bound by a fierce, fatalistic pride. They are the grey wolves, and the world has learned to fear their bite. They believe their reign is absolute, their stealth a perfect, unbreakable shield. They cannot conceive of a world where the abyss no longer offers sanctuary, where the comforting cloak of darkness can be torn away by an unseen force, where they, the hunters, can suddenly and terrifyingly become the hunted. They do not know it yet, but a sound is coming, a simple, metallic pulse that will echo through the depths and signal the end of their dominion. The tactics of the U-boat Wolfpack were a symphony of stealth, patience, and coordinated violence. A revolutionary doctrine that had brought the most powerful naval empire in the world to its knees. It was a strategy born from the mind of Admiral Karl Dernitz, a man who understood that the U-boat's greatest weapon was not its torpedoes, but its invisibility. The hunt began not with sight, but with sound. In the silent, insulated world of a submerged U-boat, The hydrophone operator was the eyes and ears of the wolf. For hours, sometimes days, he would sit, his headphones clamped tight, listening to the groans of the hull, the whisper of the currents, and the distant songs of whales. He was listening for a different sound, the rhythmic, mechanical beat of 1,000 turning propellers, the sound of a convoy. Once a convoy was detected, the first U-boat to make contact would not attack. Instead, it would shadow the convoy, staying just over the horizon, reporting its position, speed, and course back to U-boat command in France. Dönitz and his staff would then vector other U-boats in the area, a pack of wolves converging on their prey from all directions. The attack itself was a masterpiece of calculated risk. The preferred method, especially in the early years of the war, was a surface attack at night. Under the cloak of darkness, the U-boat, with its low profile, was nearly invisible to the lookouts on the merchant ships and their escorts. Running on its powerful diesel engines, it was also faster and more maneuverable on the surface than many of the corvettes and destroyers assigned to protect the convoy. Captain Lieutenant Richter would bring U-571 into the midst of the convoy, a wolf in the flock. The tension in the control room would be unbearable. Men would sweat in the cold, their movements economical, their voices hushed whispers. Through the periscope or from the open bridge, Richter would line up his shots, calculating the speed and angle of multiple targets. Raw 1, loss. Raw 2, loss. Torpedo 1. Fire. Torpedo 2. Fire. The U-boat would shudder as the eels were launched. Then, the agonizing wait. Seconds would stretch into an eternity. The explosion, when it came, was a dull, satisfying thump that vibrated through the hull, followed by the sight of a brilliant orange flower blossoming against the night sky. A cheer would erupt in the control room, quickly silenced by Richter's sharp command. This was no time for celebration. Now came the escape. The U-boat would crash dive, its klaxon horn blaring, plunging into the cold, protective embrace of the deep. Behind them, the convoy's escorts would begin their frantic, often futile, search. They would drop depth charges, great drums of high explosives set to detonate at specific depths, but the ocean was vast, and a submerged submarine was a tiny needle in an immense, dark haystack. The depth charge attacks were often a blind barrage, a show of force that rarely found its mark. Down below, the crew of U-571 would listen to the explosions, the steel hull groaning and creaking with each concussive blast. But they were safe. They were invisible. They had mastered the art of the silent hunt. This was the world they knew, a world where they held all the advantages, a world built on the fundamental assumption that what the enemy could not see, he could not kill. As early as 1941, the German U-boat crews, the confident masters of their underwater domain, began to encounter something new in the darkness. It was a subtle, unsettling change in the rhythm of the hunt, a discordant note in the symphony of the Atlantic. It wasn't yet a clear and present danger, But it was a mystery, a whisper in the ether that hinted at a shift in the unseen war. The British, desperate to counter the U-boat menace, had been working on a secret weapon. It was not a new depth charge or a faster destroyer. It was a sound. They called it ASDIC, an acronym for the Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee. It was an early, primitive form of what would later be known as sonar. ASDIC worked by sending a pulse of sound, a ping, out from a transducer mounted beneath the hull of a ship. If this sound wave struck a submerged object, like a submarine, it would bounce back as an echo, which could be detected by a hydrophone. The time it took for the echo to return could be used to calculate the range to the target. From the perspective of Captain Lieutenant Richter and his crew, their first encounters with ASDIC were more puzzling than terrifying. They would be submerged, moving in for an attack, or escaping after one, and their hydrophone operator would suddenly report a strange, recurring sound, a rhythmic, almost metallic ping, 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 that was unlike any natural ocean noise. At first, they dismissed it. Perhaps it was a malfunctioning piece of equipment on a nearby ship, or some new, strange form of Allied communication. But then, the depth charges would come, and they seemed less random. Sometimes, a pattern of charges would explode unnervingly close, as if the escort had a rough idea of where they were, even though they were deep and running silent. The German command, B-Dienst, their naval intelligence service, was aware of the British experiments with underwater sound detection. They knew about ASDIC, but their initial assessments were dismissive. They believed the system was crude, unreliable, and had a very limited range. They concluded that it was only effective at very slow speeds and could be easily fooled by a U-boat's evasive maneuvers. They advised their U-boat commanders that while the pinging indicated they had been detected, a quick dive to a deeper depth or a sharp turn would likely break the contact. For a time, this seemed to be true. The early ASDIC sets were indeed finicky. A layer of colder water, known as a thermocline, could bend the sound waves, creating false echoes or hiding a submarine completely. The skill of the operator was paramount, and in the early days, many were inexperienced. Richter and his fellow commanders learned to treat the ping as a nuisance, a sign to be more cautious, but not as a death sentence. The abyss was still their friend. The vast, complex ocean still offered 1,000 places to hide. They were still the hunters, and the ping was just the sound of their prey growing nervous. They did not yet understand that this faint, rhythmic whisper was the ancestor of a scream that would soon fill their world with terror. The winter of 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic is at its zenith, a brutal, grinding war of attrition. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Richter, now a seasoned ace, with a Knight's Cross dangling from his neck, guides U-571 through the icy waters south of Greenland. The happy time is a distant memory. The convoys are better protected now, with more escorts and the constant threat of long-range aircraft. The hunt is harder, more dangerous, but the fundamental advantage, Richter believes, still belongs to them. The advantage of stealth. His hydrophone operator detects a large, slow-moving convoy. The wolf pack begins to converge. U-571 slips through. The outer screen of escorts, submerged at periscope depth. Richter is in his element. The tension in the control room, a familiar electric thrill. He lines up a shot on a large, heavily laden tanker. Raw Eins. Loss. The torpedo runs true. A massive fireball erupts on the horizon, illuminating the grey sea and sky for a brief, glorious moment. Then, chaos. Alarms blare on the surface ships. Searchlights sweep across the water. The escorts turn, their bows cutting through the waves, hungry for revenge. Alarm! Tauchen! Alarm! Dive! U-571 plunges into the depths, its crew moving with the practiced efficiency of men who have done this 100 times. They level off at 150 meters, running silent, the electric motors humming at their quietest setting. They will wait out the storm, let the destroyers waste their depth charges, and then slip away into the forgiving darkness. But this time, it's different. The hydrophone operator's voice is sharp, laced with a new kind of tension. Pinging, sir. It is very clear. Richter listens. It is the familiar sound of Azdic, but something has changed. It's not the faint, intermittent pulse of the early war. This is a sharp, confident, and terrifyingly regular ping, ping, ping. It echoes through the steel hull of the U-boat, a sound you don't just hear with your ears, but feel in your bones, a vibration that travels up the spine and settles as a cold knot in the pit of the stomach. A destroyer is overhead, its powerful propellers a frantic, churning roar that drowns out all other sound. Then, the sound changes. The interval between the pulses shortens dramatically. P-I-N-G, 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 P-I-N-G. It's getting faster, louder. It's like a monstrous, metallic heartbeat, accelerating as the predator closes in for the kill. Richter barks orders, Hart Stewardboard, tiefer gehen auf 200 Meter. Hard starboard, go deeper to 200 meters. The classic, evasive maneuvers that had always worked before. But the pinging doesn't stop. It follows them. It's locked on, an invisible leash of sound pulling them towards their doom. The crew exchange fearful glances in the dim, red emergency light of the control room. The confident swagger of the hunter is gone, replaced by the wide-eyed, primal dread of the cornered prey. They are no longer a ghost in the machine. They are a specimen under a microscope, pinned by a beam of invisible, inescapable sound. They are naked, they are blind, but the enemy can see. Then comes the high-pitched, terrifying scream of a depth charge sinking through the water, followed by a cataclysmic explosion. The U-boat is violently thrown, lights flicker and die, and men are hurled from their stations, their bodies slamming against the hard steel of the bulkheads. The hull groans, a tortured, metallic scream of its own, and rivets pop like gunshots. Icy water begins to spray from a dozen new leaks, a chilling reminder of the crushing pressure that lies just inches away. This is not a random pattern. The charges are perfectly placed. A cage of death forming around them. Each explosion, another bar, slamming into place. In that moment of terrifying clarity, as the relentless pinging continues and another stick of depth charges screams down upon them, Klaus Richter understands. The war has changed. Their greatest weapon, their invisibility, has been stolen from them. The silent hunt is over. From now on, they are not the wolves, they are the prey. The ping is not just a sound, it is their death knell, an echo from a new kind of hell. The terrifying new sound that was tormenting the U-boat crews was the product of a revolution in underwater acoustics, a quantum leap beyond the early, primitive Aztec sets. The technology, now primarily developed and mass-produced by the United States, was called sonar, sound navigation and ranging, and it had matured into a sophisticated and deadly weapon, the centerpiece of a new scientific approach to anti-submarine warfare. Explaining how active sonar works. The fundamental principle remained the same. Send out a pulse of sound and listen for the echo. But every single component of the system had been drastically improved through a massive, coordinated research and development effort involving the best scientific minds in the Allied nations. The transducers, the devices that converted electrical energy into sound waves and back again, were now more powerful, capable of sending out a more focused, directed ping that could travel further with less distortion. They were also more sensitive, able to detect the faintest whisper of a returning echo. The amplifiers and filters were more sophisticated, using vacuum tube technology to distinguish the faint, specific echo of a submarine's steel hull from the cacophony of background ocean noise, the sounds of surface waves, marine life, and the groaning of the destroyer's own hull. The new sonar sets were no longer just a ranging device. They were a bearing device as well. Operators could now determine not only how far away a submarine was, but in what precise direction. A skilled sonarman, sitting in his small, dark, and often violently pitching compartment aboard a destroyer, could now paint a surprisingly detailed picture of the unseen battlefield below. He would sit for hours, his entire world contained within his headphones, a priest of the deep listening for the whispers of his steel god. He would hear the ping go out, a sharp, clean pulse of energy sent into the abyss. Then he would listen, filtering out the irrelevant noise, waiting for the return. An echo from a rock formation on the seabed would be a dull, mushy sound, lacking definition. An echo from a school of fish or a large whale would be soft and indistinct. But the echo from the curved, pressure-resistant steel hull of a U-boat was unique. A sharp, clear, metallic, and utterly unmistakable boing. It was a sound that meant death. Once he had a contact, the hunt became a deadly, intricate dance of physics and intuition. The sonar operator would guide the destroyer's helmsman, calling out bearings and ranges in a calm, steady voice that belied the life and death stakes. Contact bearing 270, range 1,000 yards. Target is moving left to right. The destroyer would turn, its own powerful propellers churning the water, a sound that would temporarily deafen its own sonar. The operator had to be skilled enough to distinguish the submarine's echo from the overwhelming noise of his own ship and the other vessels in the convoy. As the destroyer closed in, the pinging would become faster, giving the operator a more rapid update on the U-boat's position. But the sonar had a critical weakness, a fatal flaw that U-boat commanders tried desperately to exploit. Directly beneath the ship, the sound waves from the transducer created a blind spot, a cone of silence where the submarine could no longer be detected. This was the moment of maximum danger and opportunity. The destroyer had to make its final run blind, relying on the last known position and predicted course of the U-boat. A skilled Kapitän Lieutenant like Klaus Richter knew this and would often attempt a sharp, evasive fishtail maneuver at the last second, hoping to slip out of the depth charge pattern. To counter this, the Allies developed new weapons like the Hedgehog, a forward-throwing mortar that fired a pattern of 24 small contact-fused bombs ahead of the ship, allowing it to attack while still in sonar contact. This combination of advanced active sonar and new, more precise weaponry was what had turned the tables in the Atlantic. The Germans, with their passive hydrophones, could only listen to the world around them. The Allies, with their active sonar, could now shout into the darkness and listen for the specific echo that betrayed the U-boat's hiding place. The science of sound had been weaponized, and the ocean, once a vast, comforting sanctuary for the grey wolves, was now a transparent, illuminated arena of death. For the men trapped inside the U-boat, the experience of being hunted by a sonar-equipped destroyer was a unique and exquisite form of psychological and physical torture. It was a descent into a claustrophobic hell, a world where the only sensations were the groaning of stressed metal, the percussive terror of explosions, and the relentless, maddening ping of their unseen tormentor, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and drill directly into the soul. The hunt would begin with that first clear ping, a simple sound that acted as an announcement that their invisibility, their greatest strength, was gone. The atmosphere in the U-boat would instantly change. The casual, often coarse, camaraderie of the patrol would evaporate, replaced by a tense, disciplined silence, thick with unspoken fear. Every man would focus on his station, his movements precise and economical, his face a grim mask of concentration. Kapitän Lieutenant Richter would bark orders into the voice pipe, sending the U-boat into a series of desperate, evasive maneuvers, sharp turns, sudden changes in depth, a frantic attempt to shake the invisible beam of sound that was locked onto them with unerring accuracy. But the pinging would continue, a merciless metronome counting down the seconds of their lives. It would get faster and more insistent as the destroyer closed in, the sound seeming to penetrate the very steel of the hull, making the deck plates vibrate. Men would grip whatever they could, a valve handle, a bunk frame, bracing for the inevitable. They were blind, deep in the crushing, absolute darkness of the abyss, with no way of knowing exactly where the enemy was, only that he was above them, watching them, coming for them. Then came the depth charges. The first sound would be a high-pitched whirring or screaming as the heavy canisters sank through the water towards them, a sound that would make the hairs on a man's arms stand on end. Then, the explosions. A near miss would feel like a giant, invisible sledgehammer blow against the hull. The U-boat would be violently whipped sideways. Lights would shatter, sending shards of glass flying, and a shower of cork insulation, paint flakes, and condensation would rain down on the crew. Men would be thrown from their bunks, tools would fly from their racks, and the deck plates would buckle and jump beneath their feet. The noise was deafening, a series of sharp, bone-jarring cracks that seemed to tear the world apart. The sound of unimaginable violence. The pressure on the hull would be immense. Seams would split, rivets would pop with the sharp report of rifle shots, and icy Atlantic water would begin to spray into the compartments in a dozen new places. The ominous call of Wassereinbruch, water breach, would send men scrambling with heavy wrenches and pre-cut wooden plugs to stem the leaks, fighting a desperate, losing battle to keep their steel coffin from succumbing to the crushing, indifferent weight of the ocean. A direct hit was unthinkable. It meant instantaneous, violent oblivion, a flash of light, and a final, silent compression as the sea claimed them. But the near misses were a slow, agonizing death, a torture of 1,000 cuts. With each explosion, the U-boat would weaken, delicate gauges would shatter, high-pressure air pipes would burst with a deafening roar, and the massive lead-acid batteries, which powered their life-sustaining electric motors and lights, could crack, releasing clouds of poisonous chlorine gas into the already foul air. The air would grow thick and unbreathable. The temperature would plummet to near freezing, and the men, trapped in their steel prison, could do nothing but endure, pray, and listen to the relentless, hateful pinging that signaled the next wave of destruction was on its way. This was the new reality of the Battle of the Atlantic, a brutal, terrifying ordeal that would break in the bodies and shatter the minds of even the most hardened and courageous U-boat veterans. Faced with the terrifying, almost supernatural effectiveness of Allied sonar, the German High Command, Oberkommando der Marine, and its increasingly desperate U-boat crews began a frantic search for a way to reclaim their lost invisibility. The war in the Atlantic had transformed into a brutal technological arms race, a frantic battle of innovation, where the ultimate prize was silence. The Germans, long considered masters of precision engineering, threw their considerable technical prowess into developing countermeasures, a series of desperate, often ingenious, gambles designed to fool the relentless, all-seeing ping. One of the most ambitious and scientifically advanced projects was codenamed Alberic. This was a special, anechoic, sound-absorbing tile, a two-layer sheet of synthetic rubber, approximately 4 millimeters thick, designed to be glued to the exterior of a U-boat's hull. The rubber contained a series of precisely engineered holes which were designed to absorb the energy of an incoming sonar pulse, dissipating it as heat rather than reflecting it back to the destroyer's receiver. It was, in effect, an early form of stealth technology designed to make the U-boat a black hole for sound waves in the 10-18 kHz frequency range used by Allied sonar. The project showed immense promise in laboratory tests, but it was plagued with practical problems. The special adhesive required to attach the tiles to the hull was weak and often failed in the harsh, corrosive saltwater environment of the North Atlantic. After a few weeks at sea, especially after repeated depth chargings, sections of the coating would peel off, rendering the protection useless and creating significant hydrodynamic drag that reduced the U-boat's speed and maneuverability. Only a handful of U-boats, primarily the newer Type 7C and Type 2D models, were ever fully coated with albaric, and its effectiveness in actual combat was limited and ultimately disappointing. A more widely used, if cruder, countermeasure was a decoy system known as Bold, named after the mythical kobold, a mischievous sprite from German folklore. It was also called the Pillenwerfer, pill thrower. This was a simple yet clever device that ejected a canister containing calcium hydride pellets from the submarine's signal ejector tube. When these solid pellets mixed with seawater, they reacted chemically to produce a large, dense cloud of hydrogen bubbles. This bubble cloud would create a strong, false echo on an enemy's sonar screen, mimicking the presence of a submarine hull. A U-boat commander, upon detecting a sonar search, could launch a bold canister, creating a false target, and then attempt to slip away in another direction while the destroyer was busy attacking the decoy. This tactic was sometimes successful, especially in the early days of its deployment and against inexperienced sonar operators. However, skilled Allied operators quickly learned to distinguish the stationary, mushy, and short-lived echo of a bold decoy from the sharp, metallic, and moving echo of a real U-boat. They would note the decoy's position, mark it as false, and continue their search, often with even more determination, knowing the U-boat was nearby and resorting to tricks. Other, more desperate measures were tried. Some commanders would release oil or debris from their torpedo tubes to feign their own destruction, hoping the escort would see the slick on the surface and abandon the hunt. Others would try to hide beneath the turbulent, noisy wake of a large surface ship in the convoy, a layer of water with a different temperature that could bend and deflect sonar beams, creating a shadow zone. But all of these were temporary, stopgap solutions. They were the desperate, fleeting tricks of a prey that knew it was being watched, that knew its ancient sanctuary had been violated. The fundamental problem remained. The Allies had found a way to illuminate the darkness, and the Germans, for all their considerable ingenuity, could not find a way to turn the light back off. The definitive, catastrophic turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, the period when the hunters truly and irrevocably became the hunted, arrived in the spring of 1943. The month of Black May, as it became known in the shattered remnants of the German U-boat arm, was a disaster from which they would never recover. The steady, incremental improvements in Allied technology and tactics, which had been developing for years, suddenly coalesced into a brutally effective, multi-layered anti-submarine warfare (ASW) system that turned the cold, grey waters of the North Atlantic into a graveyard for the once feared grey wolves. Sonar was the heart of this new, deadly system, but it did not work in isolation. It was now part of a terrifying trinity of detection and destruction. The second element was long-range patrol aircraft, consolidated B-24, Liberator, and short Sunderland bombers, now equipped with new, powerful centimetric microwave radar, could patrol the entire expanse of the Atlantic, finally closing the notorious Mid-Atlantic Gap. The area that had once been a safe haven for U-boats beyond the range of land-based aircraft. The new radar could detect the small, low profile of a surfaced U-boat from miles away, even at night or in thick fog, a feat impossible with earlier radar sets. When a U-boat was detected, the aircraft would swoop in, often guided in the final, terrifying moments by the ley light, a powerful, wing-mounted searchlight that would suddenly and blindingly illuminate the submarine, stunning its bridge crew and giving them no time to execute a crash dive before the bombs and depth charges fell. The third, and perhaps most crucial element in this new strategy was the introduction of escort carrier groups. Cheap jeep carriers, CVEs, often converted from merchant ship hulls, accompanied by a dedicated screen of destroyers and corvettes. These hunter-killer groups sailed with the convoys, providing a constant, mobile umbrella of air cover. Their aircraft, nimble Grumman Wildcats and Avengers, could launch at a moment's notice to hunt down U-boats detected by radar or sighted by lookouts, pursuing them far from the convoy itself. This combination was utterly devastating. A U-boat that surfaced at night to charge its batteries or use its greater surface speed to get ahead of a convoy could be detected by radar from the air. If it remained submerged to avoid the aircraft, it was vulnerable to the increasingly sophisticated sonar of the escort ships. There was no longer any safe place to hide, no tactic that did not carry an immense risk. The Wolfpack tactics, once so effective, now backfired horribly. When a group of U-boats converged on a convoy, they were no longer attacking a poorly defended flock of sheep. They were sailing into a meticulously prepared, multi-dimensional trap. The escort carrier's aircraft would spot them on radar from miles away, and the destroyers, no longer tied to the close defense of the convoy, would be vectored to their position, their sonars sweeping the depths, ready for the hunt. In May of 1943 alone, Admiral Dönitz lost 41 U-boats, a staggering, unsustainable rate of attrition that represented nearly 25% of his entire operational force. The once confident aces who had terrorized the Atlantic were being killed, experienced crews were being lost, and the new, young recruits sent out to replace them were often poorly trained and justifiably terrified. The grim exchange rate of the tonnage war had flipped on its head. The Allies were now sinking U-boats faster than the Germans could build them, and they were building merchant ships far faster than the U-boats could ever hope to sink them. The logistical battle, the very heart of the war in 1905. The Atlantic had been decisively won by the Allies. Dönitz, horrified by the catastrophic losses, was forced to withdraw most of his U-boats from the North Atlantic. The happy time was a distant, mocking memory. The ping of sonar had become the dominant, victorious sound in the Atlantic, an echo that signaled the death of the wolf pack and the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. The impact of Allied anti-submarine warfare, particularly the relentless, omnipresent ping of sonar, was not just physical, it was profoundly psychological. It systematically dismantled the very core of the U-boat crew's identity and morale, transforming the once arrogant, swaggering hunters into a terrified, hunted prey. The constant, nerve-shredding psychological strain of being constantly watched, of being blind, while the enemy could see with sound, precipitated a collapse of nerve that rippled through the entire U-boat arm, becoming a weapon as deadly as any depth charge. Imagine the mindset of a U-boat sailor in 1941. During the happy time, he was part of an elite, a volunteer force that was, by all appearances, winning the war for Germany. He was a master of a deadly, complex machine, a predator who held the power of life and death over the fat, slow merchant ships that crossed his path. His confidence was buoyed by success, by the triumphant tonnage reports broadcast from home, by the medals and accolades bestowed upon returning heroes. The fear of the depth charge was real, but it was a fear of a blind, random, and largely ineffective force. There was a sense of control, of mastery over the elements and the enemy. Now, imagine that same sailor in mid-1943. The confidence is gone, shattered, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present dread. The ping of sonar is the soundtrack to his nightmares. It is not a random sound. It is a personal one. It is the sound of an enemy who knows exactly where he is, who is stalking him with cold, scientific precision. The claustrophobic confines of the U-boat, once a sanctuary of steel that protected him from the crushing pressure of the deep, now feel like a coffin, slowly filling with water and a suffocating, paralyzing fear. This constant, nerve-shredding tension, often lasting for hours or even days during a prolonged hunt, led to a catastrophic decline in the effectiveness of the crews. Experienced commanders, once aggressive and decisive, became cautious and hesitant. They were reluctant to press home attacks, knowing that the moment they fired their torpedoes, the full, coordinated fury of the escorts would descend upon them. The intricate, aggressive dance of the Wolfpack attack, which required precise timing and bold maneuvering, began to break down as individual commanders, driven by the primal instinct of self-preservation, prioritized their own survival over the success of the pack. The crews, subjected to hours and sometimes days of relentless depth charging, guided by the unerring ping of sonar, began to crack. The psychological condition that would later be formally identified as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, became rampant. Men suffered from uncontrollable tremors, debilitating anxiety, cold sweats, and a complete loss of will to fight. The once efficient crews, models of German discipline, became prone to critical errors under pressure. A slow dive, a mishandled control on the diving planes, a moment of panic that led to a noisy mistake. Any of these could be fatal when being hunted with such precision. The bond of trust between the commander and his crew, once absolute and unshakable, began to fray under the unbearable, inhuman strain. The U-boat, a complex weapon system that depended on a perfectly functioning human and mechanical team, was being broken from the inside out, not by explosions, but by the psychological poison of a simple, repeating sound. The grey wolves, the feared hunters of the abyss, had lost their nerve. The victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, arguably the most critical and protracted campaign of the Second World War, was not won in a single, decisive, Trafalgar-like engagement. It was a slow, grinding, and often invisible war of technology, logistics, code-breaking, and nerves, fought day after day in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the ocean. And at the very heart of this Allied victory was an unseen revolution: the mastery of underwater sound. The development and systematic deployment of effective sonar was the single most important technological factor in the defeat of the German U-boat menace. It was a revolution that completely upended the established paradigm of submarine warfare that had existed since the First World War. For decades, the submarine's greatest strength, its very reason for being, had been its ability to disappear, to use the opaque, mysterious depths as a cloak of invisibility. Sonar ripped that cloak away, rendering the ocean transparent to those who knew how to listen. It proved a fundamental tenet of modern warfare. The ability to detect and track the enemy can be more decisive than the ability to destroy him. The legacy of this unseen revolution echoed far beyond the end of World War II. In 1945, sonar transformed naval strategy forever. It became the cornerstone of all anti-submarine warfare, ASW, throughout the Cold War, sparking an incredible, high-stakes technological arms race between the ultra-quiet, nuclear-powered submarines of the Soviet Union and the increasingly sophisticated, active and passive sonar systems of the NATO powers. The fundamental principles, born in the desperation of the Battle of the Atlantic, remain the same today. The deadly, silent cat-and-mouse game played out in the dark, crushing depths of the world's oceans, between hunter-killer submarines and surface warships, is a direct descendant of those first terrifying encounters between German U-boats and Allied destroyers. The technology is now infinitely more complex. Powerful computers analyze the unique sound signatures of different vessels. Towed passive arrays can detect a submarine from hundreds of miles away, and artificial intelligence helps to filter the signal from the noise, but the core concept remains. The battle for control of the undersea domain is a battle for silence, a desperate struggle to hear without being heard. The story of the German U-boat crews who first heard the terrifying alien ping of sonar is a powerful testament to the fact that wars are often won not by the biggest bang, but by the subtlest whisper. It is a chilling reminder that technological surprise can shatter the morale, tactics, and confidence of even the most elite, courageous, and successful fighting forces. The primordial silence of the deep had been broken forever, and the grey wolves, once the undisputed masters of the abyss, were rendered obsolete. Their reign of terror ended not by a bigger gun or a faster ship,